"You should rest, Mom. Let the professionals handle everything now." That was the last thing I heard before my feet slipped. No warning, no stumble, just a hard shove between my shoulders. Then air. Cold air. A blink. And the stairs met my back like a wall of bricks. Crack. My head hit wood. Then everything turned white. I don't remember the fall. Just the sound like something snapping. Maybe bone. Maybe trust. When I opened my eyes, the hospital lights stung. Fluorescent. Flat. Too bright for comfort. I tried to sit up. My body didn't listen. A voice said, "Just rest. She's not really with us yet." A stranger's voice. Then silence. Then beeping. Then a smell bleach and paper sheets. I blinked again, then again, and finally saw a blur take shape. Marshall. My son stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed. He didn't rush over. Didn't hold my hand. Didn't smile. His face was stiff. Cold. Then he turned to the nurse beside him. "We'll need the forms ready by tomorrow," he said. "Power of attorney, medical authority, the whole thing." I tried to speak. My throat burned. The nurse looked uncomfortable. "She might be more alert tomorrow." "Doesn't matter," Marshall said. "She can't manage anything anymore." Those words, like acid down my spine. Can't manage. A week ago, I ran an art workshop for 20 kids at the public library. I cooked a full dinner for 6. I balanced my checkbook by hand, without glasses. But now apparently I was done. Finished. I lay there feeling every inch of my body ache, but nothing hurt more than his tone. Dismissive. Like I was a broken appliance he needed to haul off. The room blurred again, but not from the concussion. From heat behind my eyes. I didn't cry. I watched, and I listened. Because Marshall wasn't done. "She's been confused lately," he said. "She signed some things she probably doesn't even remember." That was a lie. I remembered exactly what I signed. Or rather, what I didn't sign. He must have forged it. The living trust. My will. My rights. I turned my head a few inches. Pain shot through my skull. But I needed to see. To confirm. My bag. Gone. My phone. Gone. My rings missing. All of it. Like I was being erased. The nurse pulled the blanket up to my chin. She looked sorry. She didn't speak. Marshall walked out without saying goodbye. I let my eyes close, and I began to count. Tiles in the ceiling, seconds between beeps, names I still remembered. Robert, my late husband. He would have seen this coming. Always hide a copy, he'd warned. I had, deep in a box of old canvases in the attic, and a flash drive, with every bank statement, every document. He thought I was sentimental. I was just careful. Marshall underestimated that. The next morning, a new nurse came in. Young, kind eyes, Asian American. Name tag Sarah Liu. She smiled. "You're awake." I nodded slowly. "You remember what happened?" I paused. "I slipped," I said. My voice rasped. "That's the story, right?" Her eyes flicked to the hallway, then back. "Do you want to get better here or somewhere safe?" I blinked. That was a strange question. But not really. She'd heard something, seen something, and I knew the answer. I whispered, "Somewhere safe." Sarah nodded once. "Tonight, midnight. Don't tell anyone, not even family, especially not family." She walked out with the same calm she walked in, and I stared at the ceiling again. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't weak, and I sure as hell wasn't done. They thought I was gone, but I was just getting started. The smell of turpentine still lingered on the porch rail, even after all these years. It clung to the wood like memory. Soft, sharp, impossible to scrub out completely. I used to spend whole afternoons there. Painting apples, pears, the old tin kettle from my wedding registry. Robert would bring me tea around 3. He'd knock on the window holding the mug like an offering. 2 sugars, no lemon, he'd grin. I could still taste it. Back then, the world felt slower, realer. Marshall was 6 when I first taught him to mix colors. He dipped the brush into blue, then into red, and gasped at the purple bloom. "It changed," he cried. "That's what happens when you let things blend," I told him. "The best surprises happen in the mixing." He believed me then. We used to laugh until his cheeks hurt. He'd sit cross-legged under the easel wiping paint on his jeans. I never scolded him for messes. Art is supposed to be messy, so is motherhood. But I loved both, fiercely. After Robert passed heart failure on a Tuesday morning, the coffee still hot on the table, I threw myself into teaching. Not for money, not for pride, for breath. The local library let me set up a weekly class. Wednesday evenings, children ages 6 to 11. Art with Miss Evelyn. They brought me drawings of cats with 5 legs and skies that rained stars. They hugged me like I was theirs. And I needed that, because after the funeral, Marshall stopped calling as often. I made excuses. He's busy. He's a grown man now. I told myself that until I believed it. Almost. But the truth was harder to swallow than black coffee. He called when he needed something. A wire transfer, a cosigner, a recipe he forgot, never just to talk. Still, I never turned him away. That's what mothers do, right? Give. Then give again. Even when your pantry is bare. Last fall, he visited with news he was moving closer. Wanted to help out more. I cried. Silly me. He brought flowers. Set up a shelf in the laundry room. Then he started asking questions. Do you still handle your bills by mail, Mom? Where's the deed to the house? In the file cabinet. Wouldn't it be easier if you let me manage things online for you? I smiled, nodded, played dumb. But something in his tone scratched at me. He looked at my home like a realtor, like someone measuring square footage, not memories. And one night I caught him in the attic. Said he was looking for extra frames. But he had my lockbox open, the one with Robert's letters. I didn't say anything. I just watched. He looked up. Mom, you scared me. This box was open already. I was going to organize it for you. I nodded. Let him close it. And that night I didn't sleep. I first noticed it with the cake. It was Marshall's birthday, 45. His wife Danielle hosted a dinner. Not a party, just something small, she said. Immediate family. Immediate family. That used to mean me. The house smelled like store-bought frosting and reheated lasagna. Everything too perfect, too stiff. I brought a basket of fresh lavender scones, still warm, wrapped in linen. Danielle smiled as she took them, placed them on the far end of the counter, behind the plastic utensils. So sweet of you, Evelyn. She didn't unwrap them. The dining table was long, 8 seats. I ended up on the fold-out chair by the wall. Oh, you don't mind, do you? Danielle asked already, pulling out the real chairs for her sister and mother. I didn't argue. I just sat. The cushions squeaked. Dinner passed in chatter. Mostly theirs. Work stories. Bragging about the new SUV. Marshall showing off his smart garage. I nodded, smiled, chewed slowly. When dessert came, Danielle pulled out a cake from the fridge. Double chocolate, bakery label still attached. No nuts, she said. Just how you like it, honey. Marshall kissed her cheek. Then the knife came out. Plates passed. I waited. My plate never came. Oh, Danielle laughed. I thought you were watching your sugar. Everyone chuckled. Even Marshall. I blinked. One small slice is fine, I said quietly. We gave the last to my nephew. You wouldn't want leftovers, right? I forced a smile. Of course not. The lavender scones remained untouched. That night I sat in my car a full 10 minutes before starting the engine. The dash clock blinked 9:14. I could still hear her laugh, the way she tilted her head when she said leftovers. The next week I stopped by to drop off an envelope. Utility bills. Marshall insisted on bundling through his account. I stepped into their foyer. New carpet, new wall art, and new photos on the entry shelf. Danielle's family, Marshall holding a baby, their dog in a Santa costume. My photo, a framed picture of me with Robert at the Smoky Mountains, was missing. I looked around. Not moved, not relocated, gone. We're doing a little refresh, Danielle said. Nothing personal, just cleaner this way. Cleaner. I nodded. I handed her the envelope. She looked at it like it was junk mail. We could automate this, you know. I like the paper trail, I said. She smirked. Of course. As I turned to leave, I heard her whisper behind me, she's stuck in 1983. That was the second insult. The third came at the grocery store. Marshall and I crossed paths in produce. I reached for pears. He reached for avocados. Hey, he said. Did you get your prescriptions refilled? I did. You sure you remembered? I blinked. I remember most things. Well, for now. He said it with a smirk. I clutched the pear tighter. I'm not losing my mind. No one's saying that. Just, if anything ever happens, we should have a plan. A plan. Like I was some hurricane to prepare for. I left without saying goodbye. That night I pulled out Robert's old sketchbook. I hadn't touched it since he died. The pages were dry, yellowing, smelled like cedar. One drawing caught my eye. A chair. An empty chair under a tree. He'd labeled it in his neat print, Where Evelyn Reads. I closed the book gently. Next Sunday, they invited me to brunch. I didn't bring scones. Danielle opened the door. Oh, you made it. We weren't sure. You invited me. Right, right. Come in. She led me to the kitchen. Coffee's there. Decaf. Just how you like it. I drink regular. At the table, there were 6 plates. 5 filled. Mine was plastic. Fork bent slightly at the edge. Ran out of the good ones. Danielle shrugged. I didn't eat. Halfway through the meal, Marshall said, We've been talking to someone. An advisor. Just to help Mom sort things. Sort what I asked. You know, accounts, house stuff, legalities. Danielle chimed in. End-of-life planning is so responsible. End of life. I'm not dying, I said. Of course not, she smiled. But you never know, Marshall added. I pushed my chair back. Where are you going, Mom? Home? We haven't finished the discussion. It wasn't a discussion. I walked out. The sun was too bright. The pavement too clean. Everything felt scrubbed of me. That night I looked in the mirror longer than usual. Hair thinning, eyes softer, shoulders curved, but still here. Still me. They were trying to erase me while I was still breathing. And I finally saw it, noticed it, named it, insult by insult, bite by bite. They weren't pushing me out. They were burying me alive. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Blue ink. Silver clip. Clicked once. Ready. It's just for convenience, Marshall said. So I can pay your bills more easily. The paper smelled like toner. Fresh print. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the wood, warming the old grains. Her mug sat half full. Earl Grey. Lukewarm now. Her hand hovered. You don't have to worry about any of this, Marshall added. Just a signature. She read the top line again. Authorization for account access. Full access. Unlimited. It says here you can move funds. Only if needed. Emergencies. Hospital bills. That sort of thing. She nodded, but didn't sign. He leaned forward. Mom, I'm not trying to take anything. I'm just helping. You know how confusing things get these days. Her heart beat faster. Not panic, but pressure. It was the same voice he used when he convinced her to give up driving. Too many accidents lately. Better safe. Now it was her savings. The paper felt cold. Too smooth. Unfamiliar. What if I want to pay something myself? Marshall smiled tight. Then I'll print a check for you. We'll do it together. Together, she signed. Just her first name. The pen dragged a little. He took the page quickly, folded it neatly, slid it into his leather folder. See, easy. Now you don't have to stress. He kissed her temple. That part felt real. But something else didn't. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stopped by the bank. The teller smiled. Hi, Mrs. Maddox. How can I help today? Just a statement printout, please. Savings and checking, the young man typed. Do you want the full month? Or just the past week? Full month. She waited. The lobby smelled like coffee and disinfectant. She remembered when banks had peppermint candy on the counter. Here you go, he said, sliding the sheets across. Do you need a breakdown? Explained number, I'll look at home. She smiled. Took the papers. Walked out slowly. Careful down the steps. Back home, she set them on the kitchen table. Same spot. Same sunlight. She poured herself fresh tea. Stronger this time. Black, no sugar. The pages fluttered slightly from the breeze. She closed the window and began to read. Date, vendor, amount, groceries, pharmacy, electric bill. Then, one line, 10 zeroths, 3, wire transfer, $18, 700, completed. Her throat dried. She reread it. Wire transfer. Not a check. Not a bill. She flipped to the second page. Found no other detail. Another line, 10/10, ATM withdrawal, $800, downtown branch. She hadn't been downtown in 6 months. Her hands tightened. She picked up the phone, called Marshall. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Mom, everything okay? There was a transfer, 18,000, from my account. Silence. Then, oh that. Yeah, that was for some property tax consolidation. It was due. I covered it, don't worry. I never got a notice. It was electronic. I took care of it. You're all good. Where, what? Where was the tax paid to which property? Another pause. Mom, I think you're overthinking. You told me to handle it. Let me do that. I didn't approve a wire. His voice lowered. You gave me access. We agreed. Are you okay? You sound Confused. That word again. Confused. I'm fine. I just want to understand. You don't need to. That's the point. I'm trying to unburden you. Unburden. He hung up shortly after. Said he was late for a meeting. She stared at the phone, then at the papers. The numbers stayed. Cold. Exact. Unforgiving. The next morning, she went to the attic, pulled out the canvas box, Robert's old frame files. She found the original will, her power of attorney documents, her signature clear strong. They didn't match the bank form she remembered. A pang shot through her. What if he had changed more? That afternoon, she called the lawyer Robert used. Out of office, so she left a message. This is Evelyn Maddox. I need to verify some recent legal authorizations. Privately. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. That night, she sat in bed with the statement again. $18,700. She whispered it like a prayer. It felt like a betrayal in numbers. She didn't cry. She calculated. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Voicemail. Evelyn pressed redial. Still no answer. She set the cordless back in its cradle. The kitchen clock ticked louder in the quiet. It was Marshall's number. She hadn't spoken to him in over a week. Her last message was 3 days ago, just checking in. Hope you and Danielle are well. No rush call when free. No reply. The silence throbbed. She stood, moved to the window. The maple tree outside had started to yellow. October sun made everything look softer than it felt. She thought about calling again. Then didn't. At the grocery store, she bumped into Danielle. Literally. Danielle looked startled then. Irritated. Oh, Evelyn. Didn't see you there. I've left a few messages, Evelyn said. Danielle adjusted her sunglasses. Marshall's just swamped. You know how work is. Of course. I just wanted to ask about Thanksgiving. Should I bring anything? Danielle paused. Oh, we might do something quiet this year. Just the 3 of us. 3. Of course. Makes sense. Danielle offered a tight smile. Take care now. Evelyn watched her go. Watched the back of her coat disappear past the checkout line. The squash in her hand felt heavier than it was. That evening, Evelyn opened her planner. Wednesdays had always been her art class at the library. Cancelled since July. She kept writing it down anyway. Art, 5 p.m. Like ink could hold it in place. She had baked banana bread that morning. Still warm. She thought of wrapping some to bring over to her neighbor. But they were away. A handwritten note taped to their door. Gone to see grandkids. Back the 5th of November. She checked her mailbox. Nothing but flyers. Inside, she turned on the television. Volume low. Game show reruns. Familiar voices. None of them hers. She muted it. The silence was louder. On Friday, she drove to the clinic. Just for blood work. Routine. Sarah met her in the hallway. Her smile was different now. Warmer. Quieter. How've you been? Evelyn shrugged. Apparently, a burden. Sarah touched her elbow gently. You're not. They sat in a quiet corner before the appointment. Do you want to talk to someone? Sarah asked. A social worker attorney. Pastor Evelyn shook her head. Just needed someone to hear me. I do. I promise. Back home, she checked her phone. Still no missed calls. She opened her email. A single message. Bank alert password change confirmed. She hadn't changed anything. She stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. The next Sunday church was half empty. Cold pews, familiar faces all busy. After service, she approached Joan, a friend from the Women's Guild. We missed you at book club. I wasn't invited. Joan looked puzzled. Marshall said you were out of town. Evelyn blinked. Number I wasn't. I'm sorry, dear. I just assumed. Evelyn smiled. No harm done, but it stung. She came home and cleaned. Dusted shelves that weren't dusty. Organized drawers that were already neat. The more she scrubbed, the more invisible she felt. In the living room, she saw it again. The family photo from 1992. Faded frame. Crooked edge. Marshall in high school. Robert in his flannel. Her. In the middle. Smiling. She reached for it. Then paused. She turned it around. Taped to the back was a note. In Danielle's handwriting. Storage. She stared at the word. One word. That said everything. That night she sat in the dark. No music, no lights. Just the sound of her breath and the wind outside. She wasn't sick. She wasn't confused. She was simply alone. And realizing that silence could wound sharper than words, the invitation came on thick paper. embossed, gold trim. Danielle was throwing a fundraiser for the community garden project, hosted at their home, catered, elegant casual. Evelyn considered declining, but Sarah had nudged her gently. Go. Show them you're still standing. So she ironed her navy blouse, wore her pearl studs, brought a lemon tart, her mother's recipe. The house was already full when she arrived. Music, champagne flutes, women in blazers with silk scarves. She stepped through the door. Danielle air-kissed both cheeks. Evelyn. You came? We weren't sure you'd be up for it. Evelyn smiled. Why wouldn't I be? Danielle blinked. Oh, no reason. Just, things have been busy. She took the tart. We already have a dessert table, but I'll find a spot. She disappeared with it into the kitchen. Evelyn stood there for a beat. No one offered to take her coat. She found a hook and hung it herself. Inside, clusters of guests laughed softly over canapes. Evelyn recognized a few faces from church. They nodded politely. No one waved her over. Marshall arrived 20 minutes later, loud and charming. Mom, glad you made it. He kissed the air beside her cheek. His hand never touched her shoulder. Looking sharp, she said. Danielle insisted on the jacket. He walked off mid-sentence. Someone wanted to introduce him to the new city planner. Evelyn drifted toward the dessert table. No lemon tart. Instead, a line of label cards in cursive, vegan carrot bites. Lavender shortbread, imported fig torte. She checked the kitchen. Her pie sat on the counter, still wrapped, uncut. When the speeches began, everyone gathered on the patio. Danielle clinked a glass. We're here to celebrate growth. In our gardens and in our community. Light applause, she continued. Some folks think growth is just about flowers, but really it's about pruning, trimming what no longer serves. Eyes turned toward Evelyn. Danielle smiled. We want to thank the next generation for stepping up, for bringing in new energy and streamlining outdated systems. More polite claps. Evelyn felt a pulse in her temple. Let's raise a glass to letting go of the past and making room for progress. Glasses clinked. Evelyn didn't move. Her throat tightened. Danielle turned to her. Evelyn, would you mind taking a quick group photo? You're best with phones, right? She held out her iPhone. Evelyn blinked. You want me to? Snap us. So we all fit? You have long arms. Laughter. Evelyn took the phone. Stepped back. Framed the group. Saw herself reflected in the screen. Not in the photo. Behind it. She pressed the shutter. Twice. Got it, she said. Danielle took the phone. Didn't check the picture. Just turned away. Later, Evelyn slipped into the kitchen. Cut a slice of her lemon tart. Ate it alone by the sink. Tart. But not bitter. Do you want me to call your car? Marshall asked, entering. I drove. Just checking. Don't want you getting turned around again. I know the way home. He shrugged. If you say so. She looked at him. Really looked. Hair trimmed. Shirt monogrammed. Eyes tired. And then she smiled. You know, Marshall, you were born on a Sunday. He raised an eyebrow. Okay, stormy day. Roads were flooded. But I still made it to the hospital. Alone. No GPS. No cell phone. Just memory. He didn't respond. She finished the slice, washed the plate, left it drying on the rack. As she walked out, she passed the photo wall again. A new frame had been added. Danielle's family. A beach photo. Still no picture of Evelyn. She didn't stop, didn't reach for her coat. Just stepped into the night. The air smelled like basil and champagne. Cool. Crisp. And for the first time in weeks, she inhaled deeply. She drove home in silence and unlocked the top drawer of Robert's old desk. Inside, a red notebook. She opened to a fresh page, dated it, wrote one word, watch, then circled it. The red notebook sat open beside her toast. 2 words were circled now, watch, verify. Evelyn slid her glasses higher, reread the printout from the bank. Every number etched like a scar. She highlighted 3 suspicious transactions. One stood out, check number 5,218. Payable to Homeworth Legal Services, $6,500. She hadn't written a check in months. That morning, she drove downtown. The legal office sat in a beige building beside the pharmacy. Brass plaque, 3rd floor. Inside, the air smelled like copy toner and dry carpet. The receptionist wore headphones. Do you have an appointment? No, but I need to verify something. Quietly. Please. She slid the bank printout across the desk. The receptionist's smile stiffened. One moment. She disappeared behind a frosted door. 10 minutes later, a man in a charcoal suit appeared. Mrs. Maddox, I'm James, one of the junior partners. How can I help? Evelyn followed him to a cramped office with a dusty view of Main Street. She laid out the statement. Pointed. That check you cashed it. Under my account. But I never wrote it. James leaned forward. You're listed as the client. This check was tied to a file marked Estate Transition and Trust Consolidation. Signed and submitted the 3rd of October. He pulled a file. Showed her a photocopy. Her name. But the signature. It wasn't hers. Not the slant. Not the loop. Her throat tightened. Who delivered the documents? Your son, Marshall. He said you were recovering from a fall. Fall. Her legs trembled. She gripped the arms of the chair. He also presented a notarized letter granting him temporary authority. Do you recall signing something like that number? James frowned. Would you like a copy of the file? Yes, and a receipt. She folded the paper slowly, like it might cut. Back home, she laid out documents across the table like a detective. Deed to the house, bank statements, insurance paperwork, in each one a pattern. Her name receding, Marshall's growing. She called the bank again. Spoke with Mr. Jeffries. Can you tell me who changed my online access password on the 12th of October typing? That was done through a customer service request. Voice verification. Mail. Said he was calling on your behalf. Did he use my name? Yes. And he passed the basic questions. Evelyn swallowed. I didn't authorize that. Would you like to reset it now? We can add voice flagging. Yes, please. She changed the password to Sunday Storm 72. The day Marshall was born. The day she made it alone. That night she lit one candle, opened the file from the lawyer. Inside was a copy of a new trust document. Marshall, as sole executor. A clause stating she was currently transitioning away from financial management due to age-related cognitive decline. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't just being removed, she was being rewritten. She called Sarah. I need someone discreet. A second opinion. A lawyer. Trustworthy. Sarah hesitated. You sure you want to go down this path? I'm sure I can't keep pretending. Sarah whispered a name. She handled my aunt's conservatorship. She's sharp. And she listens. That's all I need right now. 2 days later, Evelyn sat across from Maria Dillard, estate attorney. Bookshelves behind her. No computer, just yellow pads. Evelyn handed over her file. Quietly, one paper at a time. Maria nodded slowly. This is layered and intentional. Can it be reversed? Yes, but not loudly. If we move too fast, he'll see you coming. Then we don't. We move like water. Maria smiled. Do you want to revoke his access immediately? Not yet. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. I want to see how far he thinks he can go. Maria leaned back. Then we document. We build. And when the time comes, we strike clean. Evelyn exhaled. For the first time in weeks, it felt like she had ground beneath her. That night, Evelyn rewrote her will. Marshall's name vanished. She assigned everything to a new trust. Not in her name, but in Robert's mother's Rom. A detail Marshall wouldn't think to trace. The lemon tart recipe, her paintings, her savings, her land. All now in the name of legacy, not blood. She went to the attic, opened an old chest. Inside, photos, deeds, one velvet box. She pulled out her wedding band, held it in her palm. A symbol, not of marriage, but of vows kept, even when others forgot theirs. She slipped it on. The house exhaled slowly in the dark. Evelyn lay on her back, eyes open. The ceiling fan clicked every fifth turn. 1:47 a.m. She didn't bother looking again. The numbers wouldn't change how hollow she felt. She had made a list earlier that evening. People to call, documents to check, questions to ask. It sat now on the nightstand, half-shadowed. But her mind clung to something else. Robert? She rolled over, reached under the bed, and pulled out a cedar box. It creaked when opened. The scent rose instantly: lavender, sachet, and old paper. Inside were letters, yellowed, rubber-banded, and one photo. Robert on their porch swing shirt half-tucked, holding a mug with the words, better half. She smiled. Her fingers traced the image, then found one envelope with her name in his handwriting. It wasn't dated. Just for when you feel lost. She opened it slowly. Eve, if you're reading this, it means things aren't steady. You're probably doubting yourself. I know you. You'll question if you're being too soft, too suspicious. But Eve, you are the strongest woman I've ever known. If someone makes you feel small, they don't deserve your trust. You built our family. You protected it. Don't let anyone unbuild you. With you always. The tears came without permission. They slipped into her hair. Her pillow stayed quiet. By morning, she hadn't slept, but she had decided. She brewed strong coffee, toasted bread, didn't butter it, opened the red notebook, wrote build plan, not reaction. Her handwriting looked steadier than she felt. She called Maria. Let's schedule the trust movement for next Thursday. Quietly. We'll set it up. Do you want copies for your safe? I want 3. 1 goes to Sarah, 1 to Joan at the church, the 3rd. I'll keep where he'll never look. Maria paused. Are you okay, number? But I'm clear. She spent the day filing, not just papers, emotions, old anger, new shame, grief for the boy she raised, the man he became. She thought about every lunch she packed, every fever she sat through, every time she lied and said, "You did your best," when he hadn't. She wondered if he remembered any of it. She wondered if it mattered. At dusk, she walked the garden. Her hands skimmed the rosemary bush, snapped one stem. The scent hit strong, sharp, clean. She remembered Robert planting it for her. To keep your memory strong, he joked. Now it would anchor her. She plucked a few more. She sat at the kitchen table that night. 1 candle, 1 cup of tea. The house was still, but her mind wasn't. She wrote until her hand cramped. Wills, questions, passwords, secret locations, backups. Then paused. Wrote one final line. No one erases me while I breathe. The sun was just peeking through the curtains when Evelyn zipped up her navy cardigan. No rings, no makeup, just the red notebook tucked into her tote and a sharp mind behind steady eyes. She took the bus downtown. Not her usual route, she walked 2 blocks extra to avoid the usual corner. Invisibility was now her armor. At First National Bank, she waited in the corner chair, the one by the fake ficus, until Mr. Jeffries was free. He greeted her with a professional smile. Mrs. Maddox. What can I do for you today? She handed him a folded form. I'd like to open a private high-security savings account. New number. Separate from all prior connections. He scanned the document. And you'd like to move funds, just enough to buy silence if needed. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She leaned in. Also, I want to revoke all online access permissions, and I'd like voice authentication for future changes. Of course, he made the changes. She watched the screen reflect each keystroke. With each click, she felt her breath deepen. By the time she left the building, her money had a new home, and so did her trust. Next stop, Maria Dillard's office. Maria was ready. All the paperwork's in this folder. Sign here, here, and here. Your legacy trust is now in the name of the Evelyn Maddox Educational Fund per your request. Make the beneficiaries public students with caregiving parents. Not blood, not marriage, not default. Maria nodded. I also added a clause, should anyone dispute the trust, their claim is void. No contest. Perfect. Evelyn slid the signed documents into separate envelopes. 1 for Sarah, 1 for Joan. 1 for the safe deposit box she would open next. She sealed each with gold foil stickers she'd brought from home. Legacy deserved care. By lunchtime, she sat in the small library near the park. The window beside her hummed with the low buzz of street noise. Her tea smelled of bergamot and lemon peel. She opened the red notebook, wrote all fronts secured. Begin final observation. She underlined it twice. Across the room, children laughed in the reading corner. Her eyes misted, but she blinked it away. This was not grief. It was preparation. The last task, 1 letter, handwritten. She began, to whom it may concern. If you are reading this, it means I have chosen silence over spectacle. What was taken from me was never just money. It was dignity, trust, and years of love. But rest assured, my story did not end in erasure. It ended in legacy. Asterisk. She folded it carefully, sealed it, labeled it, hold until 2026. That night she watched the moon rise through the kitchen window. Her house was quiet, but the silence no longer crushed her. She brewed a pot of chamomile, pulled out her calendar, drew a red circle around the 9th of November. 1 day cutoff, she wrote beside it. She stared at the date, smiled. The 9th of November began like any other, but Evelyn had circled it in red weeks ago. She woke at 6, brewed dark roast, ate half a toast with butter. Then, dressed in slate gray, Robert's favorite color on her, she watered her rosemary, lit one candle beside the sink, then waited. She didn't need to rush. The first sign came at 8:13 a.m. Marshall called. Her phone rang once, then fell silent. She'd turned off ringtones that morning. Let it go to voicemail. At 8:22 a second call. No message. Then a text. Marshall, Mom, are you home? Trying to check something online. Can you call? She didn't. At 9:01 her bank's fraud department rang her. Mrs. Maddox, someone attempted to log into your previous online account multiple times using invalid credentials. We froze access as a precaution. She smiled. Thank you. As instructed. By 1037 her email pinged. Subject, urgent account access denied. She didn't open it. She knew what it said. Her hands stayed steady as she folded towels. The scent of lavender softener rose like a calm shield. At 1115 Marshall arrived at her house. No knock. He had a key, or so he thought. She'd changed the locks last week. She watched him from the upstairs window. He rattled the knob, rang the bell, stepped back annoyed, then pulled out his phone. Another call, another voicemail. She sat by the desk, wrote in the red notebook, Phase 1 complete. He is now aware of loss. At 1142 her lawyer texted. Maria Dillard received notification Marshall attempted to access the Legacy Trust via his previous credentials. Flagged and denied. Shall we proceed to notify him formally? Evelyn number. Let him stew in questions. We wait until he asks nicely. She closed the notebook, lit another candle. Justice didn't need thunder. It only needed timing. Marshall stood outside Dillard, and company shoulders tight, tapping furiously on his phone. The receptionist remained composed. I'm sorry, sir. You're not listed as an authorized party on the account. She's my mother. Yes, but the trust is no longer under your purview. Since when the 27th of October, all changes were processed legally. Marshall exhaled hard. His voice rose. I want to speak with Maria. She's in court. You can leave a message. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out. Meanwhile, Evelyn walked the familiar path to St. Luke's Church. Joan met her on the steps. I got your message. Everything okay? Evelyn handed her a sealed envelope. If anything happens to me, that letter goes to the county clerk. No questions. Joan blinked. Evelyn, is this about Marshall? It's about peace. The kind that doesn't need a crowd. Joan nodded slowly. You have people who believe in you. Evelyn smiled. That's enough. At home, she sat by the fireplace. A soft October breeze moved the curtains. The room smelled of rosemary and lemon oil. She opened Robert's old notebook. Inside was a phrase scribbled in his cursive, Dignity isn't loud. It stands quietly unshaken. She whispered it aloud, then began writing. Marshall, there was a time I would have explained everything to you, justified my choices. But the truth doesn't need defense. You made decisions assuming I wouldn't notice, assuming I'd fade quietly. But I noticed. And I didn't fade. I didn't take anything from you. I simply reclaimed what was mine. What matters now is not the money but the lesson no one deserves to be erased. I hope you learned something from this. Not for me, but for your son. Mom. She sealed the letter, wrote his name on the front, then called a courier. No rush, she said, but make sure he signs for it. The envelope arrived at 3:22 p.m. Marshall was in his car engine, idling, scrolling through bank emails. The courier tapped the window. Signature required. He signed blindly, tore it open in one motion. He read the first line twice. Then again. He slumped in the seat. A bead of sweat trickled down his neck. He turned off the car. Silence fell. The street noise dulled. He folded the letter slowly, held it in his lap. No curse, no shout, just stillness. Across town, Evelyn sat in the sunroom. A soft patch of light warmed her hands. She flipped to the last page of her red notebook, the 9th of November. Phase 2, complete. He knows. I am not erased. I am restored. She underlined the word twice, restored, then set the pen down. The notebook closed with a light snap. She placed it on the shelf beside Robert's mug. The one that said, better half. She chuckled softly. I think I held up my end, Robert. Outside wind moved through the rosemary bush. The sky shifted from silver to soft gold. She rose, made tea. No fanfare, just peace. Somewhere Marshall sat still, rereading the letter. The page no longer just paper. It was a verdict. And she hadn't needed a courtroom. The days after the 9th of November passed without apology. There were no calls, no follow-up emails, no explanations typed in haste or delivered in guilt. Just a silence that lingered cold, weighty, and oddly clean. Evelyn breathed it in like winter air, sharp at first but bracing. Necessary. Marshall didn't return to the house, not even to retrieve the garden tools he'd once claimed were too expensive to leave outside. Danielle unfollowed Evelyn on the church group page. A modern exile, not shouted from the steeple, just enacted with one quiet click. But Evelyn, she didn't chase, not once. Not even when she saw the red truck slow down outside her home one morning only to speed off. She stood behind the curtain unseen, unmoved. She rose each day before the sun, washed the windows with white vinegar and old towels, even though no one was coming. She dusted the picture frames and rearranged the living room chairs, not because they were out of place, but because she liked the sound of furniture dragging across hardwood. It reminded her she could still shift the world even just a little. She raked leaves from the back garden and paused by the rosemary bush. The scent lingered on her palms for hours. When the wind blew, it rustled the porch chimes Robert had installed one quiet Sunday in 1986. She remembered his fingers twisting the wire, his wink when he said, "Music for ghosts." Evelyn smiled at the memory and trimmed the overgrown branches with care. One afternoon, she found her old lemon tart recipe tucked in a plastic sleeve. She laminated it, wrote the date on the back in blue ink, and slid it into a blue folder labeled Things That Matter. It sat now in a drawer beside Sarah's emergency contact and a faded copy of Robert's will. Legacy had many shapes, she thought, and not all of them needed marble. The mail still came, though less than before. Mostly catalogs now and donation requests from the local vet clinic. One envelope bore a shaky scrawl. Gloria, her old neighbor from 2 streets over, inside a photo from a 1993 church picnic. Young Marshall on her lap, his face smeared with cake frosting, arms wrapped around her neck like she was the whole world. Evelyn held the photo for a long time. She didn't cry. She traced the corner with her finger and whispered, "I hope that part of you remembers." Wednesdays she walked to St. Luke's. Wednesdays. The route was familiar, the cracked sidewalk outside the florist, the smell of coffee from the bakery at the corner. She'd nod to Mrs. Canfield sweeping her porch, the rhythm of normalcy. Inside the chapel she lit a candle, always in the back corner. She never spoke prayers aloud anymore, but she thought them. Names, memories, regrets. She asked for nothing, just presence, and she left coins in the wooden bowl as Robert used to. On Saturdays Sarah visited, never with pity, always with something warm. "Cinnamon muffins today," she said one morning, lifting the cloth off the tin. "Thought you might need strength." "You say that every week," Evelyn chuckled, "because it's always true." They sat on the porch, wrapped in soft cardigans, watching leaves drift like paper promises. They spoke of squirrels stealing tomatoes, rain gutters needing cleaning, and the new young pastor who couldn't quite keep the choir on pitch. But not Marshall. Until one day Evelyn broke their silent rule. "Do you think he hates me?" Sarah looked at her long. Her face didn't wrinkle with surprise, only softness. "I think he's ashamed. And when people feel shame, they hide." Evelyn sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her hands. "Hiding used to hurt me. Now it just confirms things." Sarah reached over, covered Evelyn's hand with her own. "That's not bitterness. That's clarity." On Evelyn's birthday, one card came. No return address. Inside a plain message. "Hope you're well." No signature. But the handwriting was familiar. Evelyn placed it on the mantel beside Robert's photo and a dried rosemary sprig. "I'm not angry," she whispered. "Just awake." The red notebook no longer lived on her nightstand. It rested now in the drawer beneath the table, closed but not hidden, like a chapter concluded, a tool she no longer needed to carry every day. One Sunday evening, Evelyn made chicken soup from scratch, the real kind, not canned, not rushed. She used bay leaf, garlic, hand-pulled chicken, and carrots from her garden. As it simmered, she hummed a tune, only she remembered a lullaby she once sang to a boy who no longer needed her voice. She set the table for one, pulled out the good china, not for guests, for herself. She lit a candle in a blue glass holder, folded a cloth napkin, not to mourn, but to honor, to declare even in solitude I matter. She dipped her spoon, The broth warmed her chest, a gentle ache not of hunger but healing. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and said aloud to no one, and to everyone, "Still here, still whole." The old farmhouse on Willowbend Road sat quiet beneath the early spring sky. Evelyn stood at the gate, her fingers resting on the latch, breath catching slightly. It was smaller than the house she'd left behind, but it fit her now. 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and a yard lined with lavender and sage. The wind carried their scent, mingling with the morning chill. She stepped onto the porch, running her hand along the railing. The wood still rough, still honest. She liked that. Inside, the space smelled of lemon oil and fresh paint. She had chosen every item with care. The bookshelves were already half filled. A teapot whistled faintly from the stove. This wasn't escape. This was arrival. She kept Robert's photo by the window. He would have approved, she thought. He'd once said, "If you ever get tired of being everyone else's anchor, find yourself a place with no ropes." So she had. She didn't bring the red notebook. It stayed locked in the desk at the old house, left behind like a closed door. But she brought her rosemary clippings wrapped in brown paper, planted them by the back fence. Legacy didn't need witnesses, just roots. Twice a week she walked to the library in town. She signed up to read aloud to children on Thursday mornings. Miss Evelyn, they called her. She brought her own books, the ones she had read to Marshall long ago when his small hands reached for hers in wonder. Sometimes, after story time, she sat alone on the library bench watching the town breathe, noticing how healing didn't come with fireworks, just quiet days that didn't ache. One afternoon, Sarah appeared on the porch. She carried a paper bag and a smile. "Still making that awful black coffee I've upgraded. Added cinnamon." They laughed, and for a moment time folded gently. They sat in rocking chairs, watching robins pick at the grass. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a lemon tart. "Birthday practice," she said. Evelyn nodded. "It'll be a good one this year." Later that week, Evelyn sat by the kitchen window, pen in hand, sunlight warming the edge of her letter. To the first recipient of the Evelyn Maddox Educational Fund, "You don't know me. You don't need to, but I know something about you. I know you care for someone while trying to dream for yourself. That takes a kind of courage few people recognize. Use this support to believe in your own voice. Not because it's loud, but because it matters. I wish you soft mornings, good mentors, and a sense of your own worth that never needs proving. In quiet solidarity, E.M." She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and tied it with a green ribbon. Then placed it in the basket marked Spring Mail. Outside, the rosemary swayed. The fence was no longer a boundary. It was a frame. That afternoon, Emily arrived unexpectedly, her youngest, Clara, age 6, in tow. "Sorry for dropping in, we were nearby. She wanted to meet you again." Clara hid behind her mother's leg, peeking with curiosity. "Hi," Evelyn said, kneeling gently. "You like books?" Clara nodded. "My mom says you're strong." Evelyn smiled. "Sometimes. Other times I just keep going." They sat in the garden, Evelyn pointing out which herbs were good for tea, which were best left to the bees. Clara leaned into her. "Do you live alone?" "I live with quiet," Evelyn replied. "But I'm never really alone." After they left, she stood in the doorway, the last of the light casting long shapes across the floor. She opened the window wider. The breeze carried in the smell of earth, lavender, and something softer, the scent of something beginning.